On day 6 of Denver Broncos training camp, the run game with Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, and Audric Estime was on full display as the Broncos offensive line bounced back after a lackluster first day in pads. We'll break down that action and more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos. I'm your host, Cody Roark, credentialed media reporter for Mile High Sports. Cover the team in person every single day. Joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, the longtime voice for Broncos Country as the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. On today's episode of the show, we'll go through day 6 of Broncos camp, day 2 with the pads. Who stood out alongside Zach Allen on the day? Where does the quarterback evaluation really go from here? And what is it that Broncos fans should be looking into as we get a little bit deeper into training camp and as some preseason games creep up? How do you evaluate the position? What should you be looking at? And what is the timeline? We'll dive into that. And also we'll kick things off with the Broncos run game on display with Audric Estime, Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, a welcome sight after a lackluster first day of pads initially on Monday. You'll get all that here on today's episode of the show. You're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a special thank you to all the everydayers out there who make Locked On Broncos your first listen every single day. We appreciate you. Subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sayre, day 2 of the pads, we kind of left the question a little bit open on yesterday's episode of the podcast, really saying, hey, you got to see the offense bounce back. You got to see the offensive line bounce back in a big way because on day 1 of the pads, the defense kind of ate the offense's lunch a little bit, made it hard for them to pass, made it hard for them to run. It was a welcome sight to see the pad level get adjusted a little bit on day 6 of Broncos camp, and the run game certainly thrived because of it.
And that's exciting to hear because we heard about the physicality in the line of scrimmage, obviously on the first day of padded practice for the Denver Broncos there, and the defensive line really setting the tone. And so it's nice to hear that the offensive line and the running game kind of, clapped back a little bit. I know John Franklin Myers wasn't out there. Unfortunately, a death in the family prevented him from being at practice, and we obviously wish him and his family well. But in terms of the on-field product, you're able to see these running backs get going. You're able to see the running game get going. Remember, this was supposed to be the identity of the Sean Payton offense in Denver. This was supposed to be, if all else fails, you're going to be able to lean on the running game. You're going to be able to lean on being physical at the line of scrimmage. You're going to be able to lean on this stable of running backs that you've got. And we just didn't see that last year. Unfortunately, not a healthy, enough year from Javonte Williams, not a good enough year from Javonte. I know he played a lot, but we didn't see that from this team, that physicality, tone setting in the running game, being able to control the line of scrimmage. Seems like all that might change. I'm not trying to overreact to one practice, obviously, but it is something that we've been talking about this offseason, seeing a, better Javonte Williams, getting Audric Estime into the mix and that physicality at the running back position. And it sounds like to me, Cody, those two guys in particular, Javonte Williams and Audric Estime, are really potential catalysts for improvement offensively for this team here in 2024.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think it was just a good day all around for the running backs, and got to give a little bit of love to Tyler Beatty. Tyler Beatty in the team period had a really nice run that really got overshadowed by a scuffle and some fisticuffs by Darrell and Chami and Nate Adkins. Tyler Beatty's over there like, I'm trying to make a roster, and all of a sudden no one's going to be thinking about the run I just had because these guys are over here throwing punches and whatnot. I mean, competitive training camp, you hear about it happen all the time. With that said, though, I like the urgency that the offensive line came out with here on the afternoon. And more importantly, it really sprung guys free. Like Javonte Williams had his first carry of the team period. Jarrett Stidham got run with the first team offense on Tuesday afternoon. He had a really big run down the, off the right side of the offensive line, got upfield and, did the rest there. Like it was a 10+ yard run, and he would have had a little more room for, probably to do some damage. But then after a certain threshold, a guy stops. It's like, hey, all right, the play's over. You had a big run. on to the next one there. Audric Estime, when he got run with the second team offense with Bo Nix, he had a great run where he went off the left side. He saw a hole in between the tackle and the guard. He got up there and then he bowed out wide and took it up the sideline. I mean, Audric Estime is big, and he was embracing physicality and contact. I know right now on Twitter, on social media, you're going to see people talking about him truck sticking Omar Brown during a 9-on-7 drill. Audric's just got this embracing contact mentality to him. I mean, if you check out my Broncos video reports I do for Mile High Sports, I got some B-roll footage of Estime. He really is jacked, like unbelievable. There was an episode of the Pat McAfee show this past season where they were there for College Game Day, and there was the build up there. And I remember Pat McAfee said something along the lines of, "You are hilariously jacked." And that's exactly what it is. It's big biceps, big chest, big quads. He's going to be a problem, but he's deceptively fast as well. And then Samaje Perine having a good run as well. Very, very good productive day for the Broncos running backs. I can't help but wonder, though, Sayre. I mean, yes, it is day 2 of pads. We don't have a large enough sample size. But the Broncos, for the first time in training camp, have put Alex Forsyth with the first team at the center position, where it has been previously Luke Wattenberg since day 1. And really going back to OTAs, it was Luke Wattenberg. So not to say that there's a coincidence there, but I'm very curious. Like if I had access to the coach's film at practice, I'd be definitely taking a look at that. But a good day for the Broncos offense in terms of rebounding from where they were on day 1 of pads.
And certainly an interesting development there at center, as I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of assumed that it was going to be a rotation similar to the quarterbacks. I mean, not necessarily 3 different guys. Kind of sounded like it was boiled down to Luke Wattenberg and Alex Forsyth, as opposed to Sam Mustipher, who was previously included in the discussion there. So Forsyth being in there and the run game having success, I don't know if, what is it? Correlation is causation, or however the heck you say that. I'm a writer. I should know these things, right? But I think that that's maybe something to look into, and maybe something to read into a little bit as we get deeper into training camp here. It's notable. And it's also notable that, hey, if Wattenberg was getting the majority of the reps beforehand, now all of a sudden you have a change in the mix there. I'm kind of interested by that as well. So it's definitely going to be worth monitoring as we get into the next week or so of camp to see how they continue to rotate those guys.
Yeah, we have our eyes on that. And then look, really next week, the Broncos, they have a preseason game that's coming up next, not this upcoming Sunday, but the Sunday afterwards. So, hey, it's getting real here, Broncos country. You want to see that physicality kind of carry over, right? And look, I mean, while we're talking about the run game opening up, it was because of the physicality by Denver's offensive line and Quinn Miners, Garrett Bowles, Mike McGlinchey, Ben Powers. They all had good days on the afternoon. And there were still some times where the Broncos defense was able to generate some pressure. There were a couple of mishaps there, not necessarily with the first team, but was more so with the second and third team offensive units that we saw some of those issues in terms of protection kind of pop up a little bit. But I mean, I'd say we can always look at practices and, it's hard to say like, okay, hey, should we react or read into this too much if the defense has a dominant day or if the offense has a dominant day? Like there's no like outcome. There's no indictment either for the offense or defense. Okay, they're terrible or anything like that. It's just competition, man. And that's the thing I think that drives fans so nuts about this. And it's like, I know me, and I can't speak for you, but I know for me personally, it drives me nuts talking about certain things because some people say, well, this unit stinks. They're terrible. No, it's not. It's in progress. Like it's developing. They're competing against each other. They're trying to get better. And what you're going to see here in training camp, you might not necessarily see in the regular season. So let them build that. And then we'll evaluate when the games do come to fruition. And obviously with games coming up here for the Broncos in the next week and a half, they'll obviously have the first preseason game against the Indianapolis Colts. Will the quarterback rotation be a little bit different? Sean Payton alluded to that earlier last week, but also was very coy about the quarterback reps. So for us, how are we evaluating the quarterback competition and what should the timeline be? What should we factor into it as we go a little bit further into Broncos training camp? We'll discuss that and more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And I've got another confession to make. The Foo Fighters, they're coming to Denver this weekend. Game Time is the perfect place to get tickets to that event. Make sure somebody is getting the best of you, and the best of you happens to be everything that you can get inside of the Game Time app with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time, they take the guesswork out of buying tickets to your favorite events, including MLB games, NFL games, and more. The things I like inside of the Game Time app that make the experience, I think, overall the most efficient in terms of the ticket buying process. They have all-in pricing where you toggle that feature. It'll show you your total up front, so you're not hit with any surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, where you get a panoramic view from your seat inside the app before you buy. Plus, their lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets to the MLB or to the Foo Fighters this weekend with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Jarrett Stidham took the first team reps. Zach Wilson, is he out of the race as of right now? And Bo Nix showing off the wheels again. We're going to break down where the quarterback position and where the evaluation of this competition really goes from here as Denver Broncos training camp rolls on. But want to say thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Head over to YouTube. Also, if you haven't already, hit subscribe over there as well, as we're on the road to 15K, and we can't appreciate every single one of you enough for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's start off, Cody, by talking about Jarrett Stidham among this quarterback competition. Now, this has kind of been the theme of the offseason. Jarrett Stidham sort of looking like he's had a year experience heads up over everybody else in this offense of Sean Payton's, and Stidham operating the offense at practice, making maybe the smartest decisions. You can unpack this for us a little bit, because it was back to Stidham as the first team quarterback at day 6 of Broncos training camp, day 2 with the pads on. I know it could be confusing there as the official start date, whatnot, but Jarrett out there with the first team offense on what was supposed to be Zach Wilson's day if we were going by the previous rotation.
Yeah. Stidham getting a majority of the reps here for the Broncos first team offense. And we were wondering too, really kind of going into the morning, okay, will Sean Payton stay the course? Because he did make the mention, as we've talked about, that the rotation will change a little bit. Part of me thinks it has changed a little bit, but also I wouldn't be surprised if we come out and we see Zach get the reps, let's say tomorrow, so to speak, during Wednesday's practice. But for me, I also think when we look at it, Sean wants to dwindle this down to where things are at, because every rep that you're now getting, look, the first week of training camp, first week and a half, yes, you want to get the base foundation for all these guys, all the offensive units. But now that you're getting closer to the games coming up and you have a quarterback competition, really where it is between two guys, contrary to what a lot of people said, oh, it's open between Zach, Jarrett, and Bo. It's primarily been Bo and Jarrett as the primary guys, with the chance for Zach to really kind of maybe compete for a backup job, so to speak. I mean, that's also on the table here for Denver. All that aside, though, Stidham has been very steady running with the first team offense, and I think running with some of the other units. Like the other day, he was he didn't have a lot of success as he usually did, but obviously in Tuesday's practice, I mean, the short to intermediate stuff was there. He did have a nice connection with Cortland Sutton in the team period for a 10+ yard gain on what was either a slant route or a post. And then he found little Jordan Humphrey downfield for about a 15-yard gain on one play. Those guys have some good chemistry with one another. And look, I just say the operation's clean, but I'd say all the quarterbacks, mainly, all the quarterbacks today had passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. Zach Allen had a couple of passes batted down on Jarrett Stidham on the afternoon. Matt Henningsen had a pass knocked away and batted down against Bo Nix. Now, I can't remember who batted down one of Zach Wilson's passes, because it was toward the end of practice and they moved us closer to the podium versus being on the top of the hill. So, I mean, it's just one of those things. And Sean was obviously asked about that post-practice. But I think about this quarterback competition, Sayre, and obviously you know this as well as I do. You write over there, predominantlyorange.com. You get a lot of fan commentary and interactions. We certainly see it on our show when people reply to the podcast, wherever they get their podcasts, or on YouTube. The quarterback competition's always being talked about. Who's ahead? Is it worrisome that this guy is ahead or behind? I wouldn't say anyone's really behind. I would just say that right now the process is playing out, and that's certainly what the coaches want. It doesn't matter if Bo Nix threw an interception in practice the other day. This whole idea of counting picks is not productive. You want to be able to see, how does your quarterback respond? Does he test? Does he push the ball downfield? Does he have, good processing? Does he have good operational efficiency at the line of scrimmage, pre-snap, getting out of the huddle? For this coaching staff, and this is what I'm very clear to Broncos country, from what I know, from what I have been told, and from what we are seeing, this quarterback competition evaluation isn't going to be won or lost here in training camp practices. Obviously, they factor in a little bit, 100%. There's a contribution to that, but it's mainly about, okay, what do you do in game action against the Indianapolis Colts, that week 1 preseason game? What do you do the next week when you have joint training camp practices against the Green Bay Packers, and then you play them, and then you have your final preseason game? What do you see from the quarterbacks? What do you see from the offense? That is going to answer the question about who's going to be the week 1 starter against the Seattle Seahawks.
And Sean Payton mentioned the importance of finding the guy that's going to help them beat Seattle, right? I mean, you obviously have to weigh a little bit of the immediate, hey, we want to win games. We can't get off to as slow of a start as we did last year, but also the long term of this team. Like, this ultimately is going to get from point A, which is where we are today, which is we don't know who's going to be the starter, and point B, which is Bo Nix will be the starter eventually. I mean, that's the reality of things. And that's just it may sound unfortunate on paper in terms of like having this competition, but I think with Stidham, what he brings to the table, if he continues to be steady, look, I may be wrong about Bo Nix being the week 1 starter, and it may be down the line. If Bo's not ready to go out there and execute the offense at as high of a level as Jarrett Stidham, or if the gap is substantial enough that the Broncos feel like, all right, we can win 2 out of our first 4 games with Jarrett, and then Bo will be ready. Like, the grand scheme of things, nobody's going to remember that Bo didn't start the first 4 games, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the tough aspect of this whole thing, is like, you want to start getting Bo Nix all these reps right away because he's a 24-year-old first-round pick, and you just invested in him. And Jarrett Stidham may not even be on the team next year. So why would you waste 4 games at the beginning of this season? Well, it's not necessarily a waste if Bo's not up to speed on the offense. And so I can see all sides of this. I think ultimately it does feel to me like Zach Wilson is kind of being pushed to the back burner of what I've been labeling the Jameis Winston plan.
He had a rough day too.
Yeah.
But he had a couple of nice throws, but overall he had some accuracy issues, a couple of passes in front or a little bit high of the receiver. But Sayre, like, the number one thing here too, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
I think we're seeing something as well. Like, people are saying, well, if Bo doesn't start week 1, then the Broncos made the wrong pick. They made a mistake. No. Who says you? Like, that's not how this Broncos team, that's not how Sean Payton or George Payton or Greg Penner, that's not how they're thinking about this. It's, hey, can we be in a good enough place to where when Bo steps on the field, we know he's going to be ready. And if he's not ready right away, that's perfectly fine. The reality of the situation is Bo's going to be the guy at some point, whether it's week 1, as you mentioned, or whether it's week 5, week 6. I do think, however, because like if Jarrett Stidham wins the starting job, Sayre, you know this fan base as well as I do. Like, if Jarrett and the offense struggle and sputter, let's say the first game happens where the offense goes 3 and out, 2 or 3 consecutive drives in a row, the chants from the stadium are going to be, we want Bo. We want Bo. And it's like, all right, hey, you want it, let Bo make mistakes. Let him, like, yeah, he's going to make mistakes. Like, Jarrett Stidham's going to make mistakes. Zach Wilson, they're going to make mistakes. Every other position and player are going to make mistakes this season. But it's like the microscope on the QB position is so big. Sometimes the evaluation on all of these guys becomes a little bit unfair. I think that's why it's hard to have really positive discourse on a quarterback battle or even a quarterback position in general.
Right. And it goes back to this thing, which I don't think is always true, of people saying, well, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. I think it's not true in the NFL anymore. I mean, quarterbacks are currency. Of course, you want to have a franchise guy. So if we're talking about the Chiefs, you're not talking about having 2 quarterbacks, right? But we're talking about a team that needs to establish a franchise quarterback. And you're currently working with a first-round pick from the current draft class, as well as a guy that Sean Payton has said, like, the arrow is pointing up on Jarrett Stidham. He believes in his starter traits and abilities, and he's not alone. There's other teams out there and other talent evaluators out there who believe that about Jarrett Stidham. And I know it's based on a small sample size and things like that, but man, I think training camp it's the best and the worst. It's the best because we know football's back. It's the worst because, man, can we get to the preseason games quick enough when we have people counting stats that aren't even real in training camp practices? These guys are installing stuff. These guys are practicing situations, whether they're not throwing interceptions in a game. They're not necessarily even throwing touchdowns in a game. I saw a tweet from 49ers practice. Somebody said Brock Purdy he hasn't had an incompletion in this session. He's thrown a touchdown, 60-yard bomb to so-and-so, 60-yard bomb to so-and-so. Somebody quote tweets it and said Brock Purdy just threw 4 interceptions and 5 passes. So what are we doing here? Let's not be counting the stats. Let's look at what the coaches are saying. And ultimately, what we hear and see, it's going to come, like you said, in those preseason games.
And that's where it always matters. The game stuff, the stuff that you're going to see on the day-to-day, like on a weekly basis, on Sundays, Thursdays, and Mondays, that's what ultimately matters here going forward. And we're going to continue our conversation on today's episode of Locked On Broncos as we dive deep into some Day 6 camp standouts, including Zach Allen, who's had a really tremendous start to the training camp. He's had a really good offseason program, but who are some other players that stood out? We'll highlight that and more and give an injury update on outside linebacker Nik Bonitto here on today's episode of the show. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And even though sports aren't sportsing the way that you or myself are mostly accustomed to on a daily basis, it's starting to pick back up. Right now, Major League Baseball is in full swing with their seasons. You have the NFL preseason having the Hall of Fame game this week. Preseason games are kicking off across the NFL, including for the Denver Broncos next week. And you can get involved in some NFL futures action all inside the FanDuel Sportsbook app. So sports stays around even when they're not on the television right now the way that we want them to. And all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer today. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Broncos outside linebacker Nik Bonitto missed Tuesday's practice after briefly returning on Monday. What's the latest going on with him? That's something we'll dive deep into. Plus, our camp standouts from Day 6, a scorching practice at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. Day 2 of the pads here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Special shout out once again to the everydayers for making us your first listen every single day. Wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube, we appreciate you so much. Broncos Country, if you're not an everyday listener, make yourself one so you know exactly what's happening every single day at practice. And even when training camp practices close and it's just the media members that can attend, you want to know what's really going on, we will break it all down for you here on the show. We kind of talked about a little bit the offense for Denver bouncing back in terms of physicality, against the Broncos defensive line. There were still moments where the defensive line still had an impact, even if it wasn't as physically dominant as they were on day one. I mean, they smothered the Broncos offense on day one of pads. But Zach Allen continues to be a standout player in terms of what he's been able to do with the position. He had 2 passes batted down at the line of scrimmage. He's just so fast. Like, the thing I don't think people realize, and we didn't get to see too much of it last year because of how the scheme is. It's not attacking, as Zach Allen would say, like the scheme now for the defensive lineman is more attacking versus read and react. I mean, he's got really good speed. He's got physicality to his game and a high motor to pair alongside that defensive line. It paid off well for the Broncos as the defensive line, once again, is getting really good looks at guys like he and Angelo Blackson, DJ Jones. I mean, I'm thoroughly impressed. Malcolm Roach with the Broncos' depth at defensive line right now.
And it's music to my ears because I think this was the one area outside of quarterback that this team really needed to upgrade this offseason. They put a lot of, they put a lot into that, not just in terms of financially speaking, but, just bringing in the right guys as well, getting, the top run stuffer, according to Pro Football Focus last year in Malcolm Roach, and getting somebody like John Franklin Myers, who has 5-6 years of just consistent production. Zach Allen, I think we all expect him to be a lot better. Angelo Blackson, a nice veteran name to add to the mix. We'll see if that unit even gets better now that it sounds like Ioma Uwazurike's situation could be getting a little bit cleared up, as there will be no the criminal probe. I think Cody's not going anywhere. He's not going to be charged with anything else, things like that. So that's also positive news there. Hey, the 31st ranked defensive line, according to Pro Football Focus, going into this year. We'll see how much better they can be than that horrible ranking. I mean, I'm excited about it, and I feel like Broncos country should be as well. And if you continue that just right outside those D linemen, sounds like the edge guys are all kind of putting together something impressive. I saw Jonah Ellis's name pop up from our good friend Ryan Edwards over there as he was kind of live tweeting after practice or whatever. I've seen Baron Browning's name pop up a number of times, and I think that's really exciting. He met with the media as well, and just the dude just looks huge. I know he's a big guy, but man, he looks physically imposing, and you can tell like that guy's just, if he's healthy, man. Has he had a training camp where he's been there all off season yet? I don't know. Maybe his rookie year.
I think his rookie year only.
Sure. Yeah. And so, dude, I mean, I can't help but be excited about Browning. He's rocking the number 5. He's looking cool out there, which is important to me because I like the visual aspect of the game. But man, more than that, it sounds like he's just an absolute bull off the edge right now.
Yeah, and I asked Sean Payton after practice about Barron, what he's seen from him, because really early on in OTAs, Sean came out and really kind of identified Barron as like a leader, like a guy who's just been a tremendous leader for the defense. He's taken on a more vocal role, and Barron's gotten bigger, like more muscular, and he's gotten stronger, but he still has his athleticism. He still has his freakish bend that we have seen in games. But on top of that, there's something about him that Sean said he loves. Like, he is a guy who loves football, and you can tell. And Sean says, I love guys who love football. And so Barron, he lives, breathes, eats, sleeps that. He's been good. Jonathan Cooper's been good. You know, we didn't get to see Nick Bonito, who missed practice, obviously, on Tuesday. He returned on Monday, but missed Tuesday's practice. He's got a back issue. I don't know if it's spasms or something that's popping up. Sean said kind of day to day, but more than likely we'll see if he returns for Wednesday's practice here. But obviously with that, like, you get more looks at Jonah Ellis. Jalen Allen, who is also an outside linebacker on this roster. He had what would have been a very clean sack on Zach Wilson in the team period. And then Thomas Incoom had one play. There was a missed block or a miscommunication by the offensive tackle or the offensive line. But Bo Nix would have gotten absolutely destroyed by Thomas Incoom on one particular play. And look, Bo didn't even see it come. Like, Bo was trying to look at his read to his left, and Thomas Incoom came from the right clean and would have just absolutely destroyed Bo. And that, you know, thankfully you're not hitting your own guys in practice, because that would have been very ugly to see. He stood out obviously in a big way. And so you just got a consistent rotation of guys who are vying for a spot. And when it comes to Incoom and guys like Jalen Allen, Sean kind of made the illusion like, hey, it's good the practices are good, but really it's the preseason that's going to matter for guys like that. When you factor in Bonito, Ellis, Barron, Jonathan Cooper, that's a pretty solidified group of 4 rushers right there. And you're looking for who that 5th guy is going to be. It's a competition between those 3 guys, and Darrell and Chami, who, you know, obviously got into a little bit of a brawl with Nate Adkins on the day, but it's a healthy competition. There's some good stuff to come out of that as well. Brandon Jones, once again, on the side field for the Broncos, going through the rehab process there. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, like I brought it up earlier, the passing game has really kind of been dink and dunk for the Broncos offense for a good portion of training camp. Guys on the afternoon who had catches of 15+ yards. Lil Jordan Humphrey had one from Jarrett Stidham. Brandon Johnson hauled one in from Jarrett Stidham. And then David Sills hauled one in from Zach Wilson during the team period. So those guys standing out. And look, there's a lot of competition at wide receiver as well. So, I mean, overall, a good day of practice. I'd say a very productive day for both sides, offense and defense, on day 2 of pads in Dove Valley.
And you love to hear that about those back end wide receivers, because it's not only going to help the Denver Broncos, it's also going to potentially create a Trinity Benson part 2 sort of situation, I think. I mean, I don't know that I know Sean Payton talked about this after practice, but man, the depth at receiver right now is such that you obviously want to get to the regular season healthy. So I don't think they're going to pull any trade triggers anytime soon, but you get to roster cuts and you start thinking, all right, who's realistically going to make it to the practice squad? You might be able to, You might be able to cut little Jordan Humphrey. He's not going to hit waivers at this point. You might be able to cut him, bring him back. Maybe Brandon John. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to all work out, Cody, but you got to really look at the guys who are eligible for waivers, guys who are veterans, vested veterans who won't count, towards waivers, however that all works with the NFL now and the way that the rosters are constructed. But ultimately, Sean Payton, George Payton, David Shaw, the whole front office, Cody Roark, all those guys are going to have to get together and say, how do we maximize what we've got here at wide receiver? Because we can't just go willy-nilly cutting guys like Brandon Johnson or Jalen Virgil or Lil Jordan Humphrey, who could go make an impact somewhere else. And, because it does feel like to me, I know I'm sneaking this in at the buzzer here, kind of feels like to me like Troy Franklin could be poised, and Devon Vele, those guys could be kind of poised for almost redshirt years. Like they could make an impact if called upon, but at the same time, I don't know how much we're going to see them with the other names that are stepping up, making plays here at training camp.
Yeah, it's something to watch, continue to monitor here as we get a little bit deeper. Really, the rest of this week, there's going to be a training camp practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The team's off on Sunday. They're back on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Believe it's a travel day next Saturday, and then Indianapolis Colts game on Sunday. Like we get an 11 a.m. Mountain Time Sunday kickoff to get us ready for the NFL season, and it'll really help us with some of our evaluations that we have in terms of the roster, various position battles. I'm excited for real football to be here. But with that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. For your second listen after this episode, go make sure you check out the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast hosted by Joe Marino. Oh, wait, no, the wrong one. Make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast hosted by Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs as they take you through every NFL team, the roster, their strengths, their weaknesses, and all the battles going on around training camp. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts or available on YouTube. For all you everydayers, Sayre Bedinger, myself, we'll be back tomorrow as we recap day number 7 of Broncos training camp. Day 3 in the pads. What does the offense look like? What does the defense look like? Is the quarterback rotation changing in any way, shape, or form? These are all the things we'll ponder as we get ready for day 7 of camp. See you tomorrow.